President Cyril Ramaphosa says that the 2021 July unrest is a humiliating event for the country. He was testifying at the South African Human Rights Commission hearings into the unrest that led to damages amounting to billions of rand. Almost 350 people died when marauding crowds descended on shopping malls and businesses in parts of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. The president says the instigators of the riots were hell-bent on exploiting the country's most vulnerable, humiliating them in the process.
I found it humiliating that this South Africa, which is characterized as a middle-income country, could be subjected to the type of unrest where poor people were thronging to the stores looking for food, looking for whatever goods they could get. So that too was an act of humiliation for us.
President Cyril Ramaphosa before the South African Human Rights Commission. The president's first term has been marred with challenges from the state capture inquiry, the deadly COVID-19 pandemic, and last year's July unrest. Ramaphosa says it was a humiliation and a sad reality to see the country in that state of chaos. He says instigators took advantage of the challenges that South Africans are facing.
The instigators want to exploit their vulnerabilities. They then go and open up all these stores, and our people, because they are vulnerable, they are poor, then throng to these stores, and that in itself manifests itself in their humiliation. So they participate in their own humiliation because they cannot help it, because they are caught up in this maelstrom of poverty and inequality.
The president testified that after the looting, he was troubled to see police officers going into people's homes to remove some of the looted goods and destroying them.
And I was troubled when I saw how they were going like from house to house, searching, finding bags of midi meal, rice, oil, cooking oil and all that, and taking them out and even seeking to arrest some of the people. That troubled me.
Earlier, he corroborated Police Minister Bodyguard's testimony that they didn't receive any intelligence report.
I am yet to see such a report that says this is what we knew, how it was going to unfold. I have not seen such a report myself, because it would have had to say, these are the planners, this is what they intend to hit, they will move from this mall to the next mall, and all that. Now, that was not forthcoming.
Ramaphosa says government regrets what happened and has reaffirmed his position that the riots were well planned.
We are not a failed state yet, and will not get there. We are not a failing state because we are rebuilding the capacity of the state.
The president concluded his testimony by apologizing to the nation and declaring that the July 2021 riots should never happen again. He says the riots were not only an assault on democracy but on people's rights to freedom and security. Ntlantla Khatlane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, for more on this, we're now joined by a security specialist and founder of global Bodyguard services, Condon, to look at President Cyril Ramaphosa's suggestions of incorporating private security in helping the South African police services with intelligence and capacity. And in studio, we're also joined by political analyst Sandile Swana, who will also help us unpack some of the implications of President Ramaphosa's testimony. Sandile, thanks very much indeed for joining us. And I'm hoping we've got our guest on the line. We'll see just now. But what would you say about the president's testimony? Where has it left him politically, his political capital?
I think we have to accept that Mandela came here, became president, Thabo Mbeki came, Zuma came. We've never seen this loss of credibility of the state, where people think that they can almost launch a revolution and a total absolute insurrection to alter the decisions of the state. And the decision that they wanted to alter this last time in July last year was the incarceration of Jacob Zuma. So which means they were challenging the Constitutional Court, challenging the Constitution itself and the democratic ways of making decisions in South Africa. So under President Ramaphosa, our democracy and our constitutionality is in question.
He apologized. Does he take the blame as the head of state?
Yes, he has got to take the blame because in the earlier part of the inquiry, his scope of duties was explained and the collapse of national security and state security falls squarely in his shoulders. It is his absolute total responsibility. And we're dealing here with a party nationally, the African National Congress, that is like when you have put children in charge of a house, when you're supposed to put adults to look after the safety of the house. Like, these are people who think they must be protected by somebody else. The security is not a concern of this government.
All right, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the political implications, but Kyle is with us, and I just wonder your thoughts about getting in the private sector to help with something as important as state security. I mean, is there a precedent for that anywhere else in the world?
No, I've got to say, and thank you for having me on the show, and thanks to all the viewers. But to answer the question, no, I've been in the private sector for 30 years, performing security functions. I am not aware of any country in the world that allows the private sector to come into protecting national interests during times of uprising or insurgencies, etc. It's unprecedented. I will say that being in the private sector, I cannot see how, unless it's from just a pure intelligence perspective, how we in the private sector are meant to take over the role of the police and the army in states of emergency and during such crisis moments. So no, it's a bizarre call. I'm not going to lie, from every private security owner, they're thinking wonderful call, but realistically, I don't see how that's possible.
Let's talk about capacity, because I think this is the concern the president has. Does the private sector do a better job in terms of intelligence gathering? I guess when you're hired as consultants, you do a lot of homework in terms of assessing risk and all that kind of thing. We don't know how you do your job, but do you think that the private sector has got more capacity to gather intelligence than the state?
Well, what we do know is that the private sector has more boots on the ground. I think at the moment we're about 450,000 registered security officers operating on a daily basis in the country versus the 100-odd thousand policemen. So boots on the ground is there. My concern is that the moment private security gets involved in any form of crime fighting where a certain level of force is required, which we saw. I mean, we're talking about violence and countering that violence. Private security gets labeled as private militias. We get labeled as, as being paid off by somebody to act out on a certain mandate, etc. So, yeah, although we've got more people on the ground, and one would think that would assist, I still can't see how that would work because we don't get any special privileges.
All right. Sandile, I mean, the idea of outsourcing state security intelligence gathering doesn't inspire the public, I'm sure, because we'd like to think we're safe. There's a whole Ministry of State Security there's a whole police service, intelligence even within the army. That should be enough to protect citizens?
I think that where we are is that the theory of the state is being challenged, what the state is. And one of the reasons why you have a civilization is that we all put our arms down, we put our guns down and our dispute resolution down so that the state can handle it. Now the state is saying, no, in order to be a civilized society, I'm going to hire some private guys to go and solve problems in the community. It's taking us back to uncivilization. They're unwinding, they're undoing the civilization of South Africa. So that's the first problem that you have here. So the other thing is that, you know, you can imagine if I'm a private guy like myself and I run around spying on you guys. I'm a private guy. I'm spying on you and all this sorts. So that the idea itself is unsound. So the issue of gathering intelligence must be independent, it must be impartial, and it must not deal with private interests among the citizens or the companies in the sector. Because right now you are saying you're bringing entrepreneurs, you're bringing private companies, and all sorts of people like that whose objective is to make profit. So the whole philosophy of decapacitating the state, the whole philosophy of destroying the developmental state is exactly what is happening under this current presidency.
Kyle, how far can the private sector go in terms of assisting the state? Because it does happen. Consultants get hired, security is provided for for live events and things like this. Where do you feel that a line gets crossed in terms of supporting government, especially in terms of gathering intelligence?
I think as security companies, I think they can be a far more open and more encouraged dialogue between independent security companies and local police at community level, at neighborhood level, even up to a degree, I suppose, on provincial level. I think that's fine. I mean, like I said, we've got boots on the ground. We have people in the communities. We very often hear about crimes and pass those tip-offs over to the police long before they hear about them. And again, it's a numbers game. I mean, I'm saying to you, 400, 500 odd thousand versus 100,000. So it makes sense that we would hear a lot more about certain things. And I think the challenge is, though, is not to lump everything back now onto private security and say, well, sort our issues out. We saw this happening where certain police stations were contracting out their protection to private security companies. I mean, that's laughable. If a police station cannot protect itself, you can't expect a private company to come in and protect it. Bearing in mind, we operate under different level of laws. So that's a bizarre scenario. I do think, though, intelligence-wise, we could be passing on far more intelligence to the police, but the reality is, like myself, many of us don't trust the local police that we would have to deal with, and therefore protect the client first, as opposed to protecting anything above that. Remember, we're being paid by a particular client or a particular industry to look after certain infrastructure, etc. I really can't see how the president could see us in the private sector doing all of this free of charge, etc. Like your other guest said, there's costs involved. We should be upskilling our police force. We should be upskilling our military. We should be having people in charge who know what they're doing, instead of passing the buck now to private security when it suits them.
How much did you know as the private sector about what was going to happen? Because you would have clients, shopping malls maybe, shops, that were concerned because things were doing the rounds on social media before. As a private sector, what were you aware of? What did you predict? And was it something that you could have prevented?
Well, just to give you an example, roughly 8, maybe 10 days prior to the whole arresting of ex-President Jacob Zuma, we were already informed from intelligence, and I'm talking about the different groups that we're all on. We already knew that things were brewing, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal. And we had many clients who embarked on a proactive program at the time and deployed extra security to protect their facilities. There was also many who obviously chose not to and wanted to wait it out and see if this was all true. Fake news is a big killer in the security industry. So at times it hypes things up and at times it's actually accurate. But we knew, and I'm talking about myself, I'm talking about the groups I belong to. So that means there's a lot of other guys out there who knew as well, probably even longer. It's laughable how our intelligence officers and at national level, I'm talking about government now, didn't know this was going to happen. I mean, the signs were there. All you had to do was monitor social media.
Sandile, it's astonishing to me because you didn't even need to be a security expert, private sector. People knew because they were on social media. How couldn't it be that the state failed unless they ignored?
The issue that we must not run away from is that the insurrection that happened in July last year was an inside job of the African National Congress, the factions within the ANC, whereby by 2008, 2009, a faction within the ANC made the decision that regardless of what the Constitution says, they are going to live above the law. And they started by recalling President Thabo Mbeki. After that, they closed down the Scorpions. After that, they incapacitated the NPA. After that, they incapacitated the state security agencies, and continued on and on. So the state, certain ministers, in my judgment, were physically, absolutely, totally implicated in what was going on. And Cyril Ramaphosa has not been able to pinpoint people and say these people need to be arrested from his own party in the NEC, in the top six, and in the cabinet.
So what you're suggesting is that there are people inside the ANC that are guilty of treason?
I am suggesting that, precisely.
My goodness. Kyle, I'm just trying to figure out, again, you know, we have the private sector involved in a lot of things now. Policing, really, actually, we can call it whatever you want to call it, but the moment we started hiring security guards and private security to patrol our neighborhoods and so on and so forth, we were essentially outsourcing police functions. And I just wonder if this isn't really just pointing towards more and more outsourcing, and that whilst it may seem difficult to see as a possibility, but we're almost forced to, because the state just either doesn't have the capacity or just can't.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt the state doesn't have the capacity, but one needs to go further back than that and start asking the hard questions as to why the state doesn't have the capacity. The deterioration, and I'm not talking just about the uprising, the looting, etc. last year, I'm talking about everyday life. These situations of the lawlessness, etc., has grown over the years, but it's in tandem with the complete destruction and breakdown of the police force, for want of a better word, and your guest alluded to it quite correctly, the disbanding of the Scorpions, a judicial system that's under attack. We do not have a zero-tolerance approach anymore. And the police, therefore, are basically collecting a salary, as far as I'm concerned. They're doing the bare minimal. Yes, they are good policemen, don't get me wrong. But for the most part, we hear every day about complaints of crime. You pick up a telephone and complain about a suspicious person in your street. Nobody's going to come and look unless you've got a private security company. They'll drive out and have a look because they're paid to do it. I think where private security can aid government is in training. I certainly think there's a lot more skilled individuals in the private sector, a lot that were let go by the new dispensation, people with vast experience in dealing with certain types of criminality that we no longer deal with or deal with effectively. And I think it goes back to the individuals who are doing the training, the individuals who are then doing the work. There's a huge gap. The skills are in the private sector right now, not in the police force.
All right, Kyle, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Thanks for your time.
Absolute pleasure.
Sandile, last word from you. The president said this must never happen again. Can it happen again?
It can happen again. I think it's always interesting that they told us that you are seeing load shedding for the last time. I think both of them, Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa, said that, and we saw it many times more. As he announced this, we see fiasco in Mpumalanga in the ANC conference as he is busy making this announcement, because the comrades who are causing the fiasco in the country and collapsing the security and the justice establishment are allowed to attend NEC meetings, top 6 meetings, and the cabinet. And they run free. They are not arrested. They are not being prosecuted. They are not being physically stopped from continuing.
Sandile Swana, always great talking to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter.
All right. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and there's still so much more to unpack right here on The Globe, so please stay with us.